You think you are awake, but most of what you call reality is just agreement, repetition, and inherited belief. You walk through a world that feels solid, permanent, and predictable, yet at its deepest level, nothing about it is stable in the way your mind assumes. The universe is not built like a stage where objects simply sit still and life happens around them. It is structured like a living equation that constantly recalculates itself in real time, and you are inside that calculation whether you understand it or not. What feels like matter is not truly solid. What feels like space is not truly empty. What feels like time is not truly linear. These are simplified interpretations your mind uses to survive complexity, not the actual architecture of existence. Beneath every object you touch and every moment you experience, there are invisible layers of interaction, energy exchange, and relational structure that never stop moving. Nothing is static, even when it appears frozen. Everything is in negotiation with everything else at a scale you will never directly see, but you are always affected by it. Here is the first hard truth you resist. Your senses are not designed to reveal truth. They are designed to filter it. You do not perceive reality as it is. You perceive a version that keeps you functional. That means your confidence in what is real is already based on reduction, not accuracy. And the second truth hits even harder. What you ignore does not disappear. It continues to shape outcomes in your life without your awareness. The structure does not care what you believe. It only responds to what is actually happening within it. If you are waiting for reality to become simple before you take it seriously, you have already misunderstood it. Complexity is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. And the moment you stop demanding a simplified world, you begin to see the first outlines of how deeply ordered everything actually is. You keep trusting what looks stable as if appearance equals truth. That is the first layer of misunderstanding you carry into every decision you make. The world feels solid because your senses compress an overwhelming level of activity into something manageable. But underneath that compression, nothing behaves the way your intuition insists it should. At the deepest level, what you call matter is not a collection of fixed objects, but a constantly shifting network of interactions that never settle into true stillness. You assume that what you see is what exists. That assumption is the reason your understanding of reality stays shallow. Vision is not a window into truth. It is a translation system that strips away almost everything happening beneath the surface. You are not looking at the universe directly. You are looking at a heavily edited interpretation of it. And the more confident you feel in that interpretation, the less you question what is missing. Here is a harsh realization you keep avoiding. Your certainty is not proof of accuracy. It is proof of limitation. The brain prefers stability over truth because stability keeps you functional. So it creates patterns, labels, and shortcuts that make reality feel predictable even when it is not. You mistake that comfort for understanding, and that mistake quietly controls how you think, choose, and react every day. Another truth you rarely confront is that nothing you rely on is truly fixed. The ground beneath you, the air around you, even the structure of time you assume is linear, all depend on relationships that are constantly changing. There is no final still point in the system. There is only continuous transformation that you are too slow to perceive directly. If you continue treating perception as reality, you will keep reacting to shadows instead of structures. The universe does not operate on what seems obvious. It operates on what is actually there, beneath the filter you call understanding. Space is not the empty background you imagine. That idea collapses the moment you look at it with precision instead of assumption. What you call empty space is not absence, it is structure without visible form. It behaves, it responds, it curves under influence. It carries effects across distances without needing anything like a traditional medium. The mistake is believing that nothing is there just because your senses cannot detect it directly. You move through space as if it is passive, like a blank container holding objects in place. That belief is comfortable, but it is wrong. Space is active. It participates in every interaction you think of as motion. When something falls, it is not simply moving downward through emptiness. It is following the geometry of the environment it exists in. What you interpret as force is actually structure guiding behavior. The deeper truth is uncomfortable. You are not moving through space as much as you are being shaped by it. Here is another realization that disrupts normal thinking. Distance is not what it feels like. Separation is not absolute. The universe does not treat here and there as fundamentally disconnected states. They are linked through continuous fields of influence that never fully break. What you call separation is really just weakening connection, not true isolation. That means nothing is ever completely independent from anything else, no matter how distant it appears. This changes how reality is understood at its core. If space is structured rather than empty, then every event is occurring inside a framework that already has rules embedded into it. You are not acting inside neutrality. You are acting inside geometry that influences outcomes before intention ever enters the equation. The most difficult shift to accept is this: emptiness does not exist in the way it is imagined. Even nothing is something with properties you do not yet fully grasp. The universe does not give you voids, it gives you structure everywhere, even in the places you were taught to call empty. You keep believing that objects are solid, separate, and self-contained, as if reality is built from tiny, independent blocks stacked together. That is not how the universe behaves. Solidity is an experience created by resistance, not a fundamental property of matter. When you press your hand against something, you are not touching solid material in the way you imagine. You are interacting with fields of force that repel, attract, and negotiate at scales far smaller than anything your senses can resolve. What you call a thing is not a thing at all. It is a temporary stability in a constantly shifting system. Every object is made of interactions that are in motion even when the object appears still. Atoms are not miniature billiard balls sitting quietly in space. They are dynamic relationships, constantly exchanging energy, constantly responding to surrounding influence. Stability is not permanence. It is balance maintained for a limited duration before the system adjusts again. Here is a truth that breaks ordinary intuition. Nothing in your physical world is truly touching anything else in the way your mind assumes. Contact is an electromagnetic negotiation, not physical collision. What feels like firmness is actually the illusion created by force fields resisting compression. You have never actually touched anything in your life in the way you think you have. You have only ever experienced repulsion at a distance so small that your brain translates it as contact. This realization forces a deeper correction in how reality is interpreted. If everything you perceive as solid is actually interaction, then there are no isolated objects in the universe. There are only patterns of energy temporarily behaving as if they are separate. Separation is a convenience, not a truth. The universe does not consist of things. It consists of relationships that continuously redefine what those things appear to be. The most unsettling implication is this: what you depend on as physical certainty is actually a controlled illusion of stability. The universe does not guarantee permanence to anything. It only allows temporary arrangements of force that feel consistent long enough for you to recognize them as objects. What you call reality is not built from matter alone, it is built from information. That is the layer most people never seriously confront. Matter behaves the way it does because something deeper is constantly defining its possibilities. Every interaction, every transformation, every structure you observe is constrained by patterns of information that determine what can and cannot happen. You are not living inside a collection of objects. You are living inside a system that processes relationships. This changes everything about how existence is understood. Information is not just data or communication in the human sense. It is structure itself, encoded into the behavior of energy and fields. When something changes, it is not simply moving in a physical sense. It is updating. Reality behaves like a continuous calculation where each state influences the next. Nothing exists without carrying instructions about how it can interact with everything else. Here is a truth that destabilizes common thinking. Nothing in the universe is random in the way it appears. What looks like randomness is often the result of complexity too large to track at your scale. Beneath that apparent chaos, there are constraints and rules shaping outcomes. The universe does not operate without structure. It only operates with structure so intricate that it becomes invisible to casual observation. Another realization that cannot be ignored is this: you are not separate from the information system you exist in. Every choice, every perception, every interpretation you form is part of the ongoing computation of reality. You are not outside the system observing it from a distance. You are embedded within it, influencing and being influenced by informational flow at every moment. If you continue to think of reality as purely physical, you miss the foundation holding everything together. The physical world is not primary, it is the expression. Information is the underlying logic that shapes what expression becomes possible. And once this is understood, it becomes impossible to look at existence as simple or accidental again. You keep clinging to the idea of stability, as if the universe is built to maintain your sense of predictability. That belief is not just wrong, it is actively misleading. What you experience as stable is only repetition happening fast enough that your mind compresses it into a single unchanging image. There is no true stillness anywhere in the system. There is only motion that you are not sensitive enough to resolve. The illusion of stability is one of the most powerful tricks your perception performs. It allows you to function, but it also blinds you to how fragile every pattern actually is. Everything you rely on as consistent is a temporary agreement between forces that are constantly adjusting. The moment those adjustments shift beyond a threshold, what you called stable disappears without warning. Nothing breaks the rules of the universe. It simply reveals that the rules were always about balance, not permanence. Here is a harsh realization that challenges comfort. You are constantly surrounded by change, but your mind edits it out to protect your sense of control. That editing process is not truth-seeking, it is survival. And because of that, you often confuse mental convenience with physical reality. You believe things remain the same because it feels safer to assume they do, not because they actually do. Another difficult truth is that disruption is not an anomaly in the universe. It is the default state. Stability only exists when multiple dynamic processes temporarily align. That means what you call order is not the absence of chaos, but a carefully maintained balance within it. The system never stops moving. It only shifts between patterns that appear consistent for limited periods. Once this is understood, certainty becomes less about expecting permanence and more about recognizing patterns that are currently active. The universe is not promising you continuity. It is showing you a sequence of temporary states that feel continuous until they no longer do. You keep imagining your thoughts as something private, sealed inside your head, disconnected from everything else. That belief feels natural, but it is incomplete. Thought is not separate from the system it arises in. It is part of the same structure that governs everything else in reality. Your mind is not outside the universe observing it. Your mind is inside it, shaped by the same rules that shape matter, energy, and space. What you call thinking is not a silent internal process detached from reality. It is interaction. It is pattern formation inside a physical system that is constantly responding to input, memory, and environment. Every idea you form is influenced by conditions you did not choose. Every conclusion you reach is filtered through constraints you rarely notice. The mind feels independent because it cannot see its own boundaries. Here is a truth that challenges the illusion of isolation. Perception is not passive observation. It is construction. The brain does not receive reality in full. It assembles a usable model from fragments of signals, then treats that model as if it were the whole truth. That means what you experience is not reality itself, but a continuously updated representation shaped by survival, efficiency, and prediction. Another realization that disrupts comfort is this: attention is not neutral. What you focus on does not simply reflect interest, it actively shapes your internal model of the world. The structure of experience changes depending on where attention is directed. That makes focus a form of participation, not observation. You are constantly influencing your own perception of reality without realizing the extent of that influence. The most difficult implication is that separation between you and everything else is not as clean as it feels. You are not an isolated observer inside a universe. You are a node inside a system that continuously updates itself through perception, interaction, and feedback. The boundary between mind and reality is far thinner than intuition wants to admit. There are certain truths that feel uncomfortable not because they are complicated, but because they dismantle the way you currently organize your life. One of those truths is that you are not struggling with reality itself. You are struggling with your interpretation of it. The universe does not adjust itself to match your expectations. It continues operating through consistent structure, regardless of whether that structure feels fair, understandable, or convenient to your thinking. Another truth you resist is that effort alone is not enough when it is misdirected. You can invest time, attention, and energy into patterns that never produce the outcome you expect, not because the universe is random, but because it is consistent. It responds to structure, not intensity. If the underlying pattern is incorrect, repetition only strengthens the loop instead of breaking it. This is why persistence without awareness often leads to exhaustion instead of progress. Here is a sharper realization that most people avoid. Excuses do not exist in the architecture of reality. They exist only in language. The system does not register justification, emotion, or intent. It registers interaction, sequence, and consequence. That means what you believe about your effort has no influence on how the system responds. Only what is actually done within the structure produces change. Another difficult insight is that attention is often wasted on symptoms instead of causes. You react to visible outcomes while ignoring the invisible patterns that generate them. That creates a cycle where effort is repeatedly applied at the wrong level of the system. Without addressing the structure underneath, the surface will continue producing the same results no matter how strongly you try to change it. The harshest realization is this: the universe is not confused, and it is not unfair. It is precise. What feels like disorder is usually a mismatch between expectation and structure. Once that is understood, the focus shifts from trying to fight reality to recognizing how it actually operates, even when that operation contradicts comfort or belief. There is a point where awareness becomes uncomfortable, not because reality changes, but because perception can no longer ignore what it has been filtering out. At that stage, it becomes clear that most outcomes are not random events happening to you, but predictable results of repeated patterns you continue to participate in. The universe does not negotiate with emotion or frustration. It simply reflects structure back through consequence. A difficult truth emerges when you start observing closely. Most limitations are not imposed externally, they are reinforced internally through repetition. The system responds to consistency, even when that consistency produces undesirable results. That means what you experience as stuck is often not a lack of opportunity, but a persistence of the same underlying configuration of thought, attention, and reaction. Without changing the structure, the outcome remains locked. Another realization that challenges comfort is that awareness alone does not create change. Seeing a pattern is not the same as breaking it. Many people mistake understanding for transformation, but understanding without interruption of behavior has no effect on the system. The structure only changes when interaction changes, not when recognition occurs. Insight without adjustment remains observation, not evolution. Here is a deeper point that is often resisted. The mind prefers familiar patterns even when they are harmful, because familiarity reduces uncertainty. That preference creates loops that feel safe but produce repeated limitation. The system does not prioritize comfort. It prioritizes repetition. Once a pattern is established, it continues until something interrupts it at the level where it is actually formed, not where it is experienced. The most confronting realization is that change is not dramatic in the way it is imagined. It is structural, not emotional. It does not announce itself loudly. It replaces one pattern with another through consistent interruption of old sequences. Until that level of change occurs, the same outcomes will continue to emerge, regardless of how strongly different results are desired. Now everything comes down to one final realization that cannot be softened or avoided. The universe does not respond to belief, it responds to alignment with structure. Every layer described before was pointing toward this same core truth. Reality is not shaped by what you want, but by how consistently you interact with the system you are inside. There is no negotiation point where intention alone overrides pattern. At this stage, excuses lose all weight, not in a motivational sense, but in a structural one. The system does not register explanation, history, or emotional justification. It only registers what is continuously expressed through behavior, attention, and repetition. That means the gap between what is desired and what is experienced is always a gap in structure, never a gap in desire. And that gap remains until the underlying pattern is altered, not discussed. A difficult truth becomes unavoidable here. Most people are not waiting for change, they are repeating the conditions that prevent it. Not consciously, but consistently. The same internal logic produces the same external outcome. The system is not punishing, it is simply accurate. It reflects back the dominant pattern without exception. What is stable in behavior becomes stable in result. Another realization that cuts deeper is this: the mind will always generate reasons to stay within familiar structure, even when that structure is limiting. It creates explanations that feel logical, but those explanations often exist to protect repetition, not to challenge it. That is why awareness without interruption produces no transformation. Understanding alone cannot override structural consistency. The final truth is simple but uncompromising. Reality does not change because it is understood. It changes when interaction with it changes at the level where patterns are formed. Until that shift happens, everything continues as before, regardless of insight, intention, or resistance. And at that point, the only question left is whether the structure being lived inside will finally be recognized as something that can be rewritten through action, or whether it will continue to be mistaken for something fixed and unchangeable.